Welcome to Lore to Sleep To. Relax your mind and enjoy the stories. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Yet even amid the eternal conflict that engulfs the galaxy, there are stories of faith, of duty, and of warriors who carry the light of humanity's hope into the darkest places. Tonight, we shall speak of the Black Templars, those crusading sons of dawn who know neither fear nor remorse, and of their long and terrible war upon the world called Armageddon. Let us begin, then, with the nature of these warriors themselves. The Black Templars are a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, the legendary space marines, those bioengineered super soldiers who stand as humanity's greatest defenders. Yet the Templars are unlike their brother chapters in many ways. They do not maintain a single homeworld, for they are forever on crusade, their great fleets wandering the stars in eternal pursuit of the Emperor's enemies. They are zealots of the highest order, their faith burning like an undying flame, their hatred of the alien and the heretic matched only by their devotion to the master of mankind. Their origins stretch back 10,000 years, to the dark days following the Horus heresy, when the great legions of old were divided into smaller chapters. The Black Templars trace their lineage to the Imperial Fists, and through them to their primarch, Rogal Dorn himself. But their true spiritual father is Sigismund, the first High Marshal, the greatest champion the Imperium has ever known. It was Sigismund who led the First Crusade, who vowed that the Black Templars would never cease in their war against the darkness, and in 10 millennia, they never have. Now, in the closing years of the 41st millennium, the Black Templars find themselves drawn to a world that has already known their wrath, a world where the blood of heroes has soaked the ash and the sand, where the greatest of humanity's enemies have come to test themselves against the might of the Imperium. That world is Armageddon. Armageddon is a hive world, a planet of towering city mountains that rise from desolate wastelands, their spires piercing the polluted sky like the fingers of giants. It is a world of industry and war, its countless manufacturers producing weapons and material for the endless conflicts of the Imperium. 8 great hive cities dominate its surface, each home to billions of souls who toil in the Emperor's name. But Armageddon has known war of a more immediate and terrible kind. 50 years before the events of our tale, the Orc warlord Ghazghkull Mag-Uruk Thraka first descended upon this world with his savage hordes. That invasion was beaten back, though at terrible cost, and the hero Commissar Yarrick earned his legend in the desperate defense of Hades' Hive. Yet that first invasion, the Armageddon High Command would later come to understand, had been merely a test. Ghazghkull had been probing the defenses of humanity, learning, planning. And when he returned, he came with a force that dwarfed his previous assault. The third war for Armageddon had begun. Orc ships beyond counting descended upon the system. Rocks, those terrible asteroid fortresses, crashed through orbital defenses and slammed into the planet's surface. Hades' Hive fell first, obliterated by the devastating impacts. Other hive cities came under siege, their walls assailed by endless green tides. The Orcs controlled vast swathes of territory, including the mineral-rich fire wastes and the frozen deadlands, starving the Imperial defenders of vital resources. It was into this apocalyptic theatre of war that the Black Templars of the Solemnus Crusade arrived. The Solemnus Crusade carried with it a burden of shame and a burning desire for redemption. 12 years earlier, their chapter keep on the world of Solemnus had been attacked by the very same Orcs they now came to fight, the forces of the warlord Morkrul Grimskar. The Black Templars had sworn mighty oaths of vengeance, vowing to hunt down and destroy every last Orc responsible for that attack. This crusade, they declared, would be their last, for they would not rest until their honor was restored or they had died in the attempt. Marshal Brandt commanded the crusade fleet from the battle barge Divine Fury, coordinating the efforts of multiple fighting companies across the war-torn planet. But our tale focuses on one company in particular, Fighting Company Adlar, named for its commanding Castellan. Castellan Adlar was a veteran of many campaigns, a warrior of stern demeanor and unshakable faith. Under his command served some 60 Black Templars, a force that might seem small by the standards of the Imperial Guard, but each Space Marine was worth 100 ordinary soldiers. They had been deployed to support the defense of Tartarus Hive, one of the cities still holding out against the Orc onslaught, but before they could reach their destination, something extraordinary occurred. On the eve of planetfall, as the warriors of Fighting Company Adlar prepared for battle aboard their strike cruiser, a young battle brother named Ansgar experienced something that would change everything. Brother Ansgar had gone to the ship's chapel to pray, as was proper before battle. There, in the incense-laden darkness before the altar of the Emperor, he was struck by visions of such power and clarity that he fell to his knees, overwhelmed by what he witnessed. He saw himself standing at the edge of a vast plain of glass, stretching for kilometers in every direction beneath a darkened sky. He saw a colossus rising from the desert on legs of adamantium, a god machine of terrible power. He saw battle and death and purpose revealed. When the visions passed, Ansgar knew what he must do. He made his way to the armory chapel, where the most sacred relics of the Fighting Company were kept. There he donned the armor of faith, an ancient suit of artificer armor black as the void between stars, adorned with the symbols of the chapter. He took up the black sword, that legendary blade whose origins were lost to time, said to have been carried by champions of the Templars since the days of Sigismund himself. Brother Ansgar had been chosen. He had become the Emperor's champion. The role of Emperor's champion is one of the most honored positions a Black Templar can hold. It is not a rank that can be earned through skill at arms or years of service. It is a calling, a divine appointment. When the Emperor chooses a champion, that warrior becomes his instrument on the battlefield, guided by visions and blessed with supernatural purpose. Chaplain Wolfram, the spiritual guardian of Fighting Company Adlar, recognized the signs immediately. He had seen champions chosen before, had witnessed the fire that burned in their eyes. When Ansgar spoke of his visions, Wolfram knew that the Emperor had spoken, but the visions pointed not toward Tartarus Hive, where they had been ordered to go. They pointed northeast, into the ash wastes, towards some unknown destiny that the Emperor had ordained. Fighting Company Adlar made planetfall in the desolate regions east of Tartarus Hive. The ash wastes of Armageddon Secundus stretched before them, a hellish landscape of toxic sand and choking dust, where the remnants of ancient volcanic activity had created a terrain hostile to all life. Radstorms swept across the barrens, their electromagnetic interference playing havoc with sensors and communications. The very air was poison, though the Space Marines' enhanced physiology and sealed armor protected them from its effects. Their first engagement came swiftly. An orc warband known as the High-Speed Kills, one of the notorious speed-freak tribes that delighted in vehicular carnage, crossed their path. The battle was fierce but brief. The Black Templars carved through the greenskins with chainsword and bolter, their righteous fury unstoppable. Chaplain Wolfram's Crozius Arcanum crackled with energy as he struck down alien after alien, each blow a prayer made manifest. It was in the aftermath of this victory that the full weight of Ansgar's visions began to assert itself. The company had been ordered to rendezvous with Imperial forces at Hellsbreach, a Titan Legion base that served as a crucial stronghold in the region. There, the god machines of the Adeptus Mechanicus stood ready to bring their devastating firepower to bear against the orc hordes. Fighting Company Adlar would join forces with these titans and proceed to reinforce Tartarus Hive. But when they arrived at the coordinates of Hellsbreach, they found only devastation. The Titan base had been destroyed. Atomic weapons had reduced the once mighty fortress to a radioactive crater. The warlord titans that had stood sentinel there were gone, their crews dead, their god machines silenced forever. There were no survivors. Among the ruins, the Black Templars gathered to pray for the fallen and to consider their next course of action. It was then that Brother Ansgar came forward with news that would shake Castellan Adlar to his core. The visions, Ansgar explained, commanded them to go northeast, not toward Tartarus Hive, as their orders demanded, but deeper into the wastes, toward some unknown destination that the Emperor had revealed to him alone. He spoke of the Colossus he had seen, the plain of glass, the great battle that awaited them. Castellan Adlar was torn. He was not a man given to disobedience. The orders of Marshal Brandt were clear, and the defenders of Tartarus Hive desperately needed reinforcement. To abandon them now, on the word of a single brother's visions, was to risk everything. If they were wrong, Tartarus might fall, and the Black Templars would bear the shame of having abandoned their allies. But Chaplain Wolfram spoke in support of the Emperor's champion. The visions, he argued, were genuine. He had examined Ansgar closely, had prayed with him, and was convinced that the Emperor himself had spoken through this warrior. To ignore such divine guidance would be a greater heresy than any disobedience of mortal orders. The debate was fierce, though conducted with the disciplined restraint of Space Marines. In the end, Castellan Adlar made his decision. They would follow the visions. He addressed the company, explaining the choice before them. Some might die. All might be condemned as heretics if they were wrong. Any who wished to continue to Tartarus Hive were free to do so, with no dishonor between them. Not a single Templar moved to leave. With the banner of Fighting Company Adlar snapping in the toxic wind, 60 Black Templars set off into the unknown, guided by faith and the burning conviction of their Emperor's champion. The journey through the ash wastes was arduous even for Space Marines. Hour after hour they marched, their ceramite boots leaving deep prints in the shifting sand. The electromagnetic interference that plagued the region made long-range communication impossible, cutting them off from the fleet above and from any potential allies. As the sun began to set, painting the polluted sky in shades of orange and crimson, a radstorm rose on the horizon. These tempests were deadly even to power armored warriors, their radiation intense enough to damage equipment and potentially harm even the enhanced constitution of a Space Marine. Brother Pilot Horic, commanding the land speeder Excalibur that served as the company's eyes and ears, reported a potential shelter ahead. 9 kilometers distant, on a plain of vitrified sand, the wreckage of some enormous vessel jutted from the ground. The plain of glass, just as Ansgar had seen in his vision. The company made for the wreck with all speed, reaching it just as the first tendrils of the radstorm began to lash the desert. What they found was the remains of an Orc hulk, one of those massive space-going vessels that the Greenskins constructed from the wreckage of countless other ships. This one had crashed here 50 years ago, during the Second War for Armageddon, and had been partially buried by the blast that had turned the surrounding sand to glass. The Black Templars took shelter within its rusted corridors, their flashlights piercing the absolute darkness of the alien vessel's interior. The passages were vast, built to accommodate orcs, and the Templars moved in tactical formation, alert for danger. They found it soon enough. The first attack came without warning. Creatures burst from pipes and openings all around them, savage things with bloated bodies, powerful legs, and jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth. Squigs, the semi-sentient beasts that existed in symbiosis with Orc-kind, attacked in their hundreds. The Black Templars fought with controlled fury, their bolters roaring in the confined spaces, their chainswords singing as they carved through alien flesh. Brother Gervais, a neophyte still learning the ways of war, found himself surrounded by the creatures and fought with desperate courage, his combat knife and bolt pistol his only weapons against the tide. Castellan Adlar wielded his thunder hammer with devastating effect, each crackling blow crushing squigs into pulp. Chaplain Wolfram's Crozius left trails of energy in the darkness as he struck down the aliens while reciting litanies of hatred. The battle seemed endless, wave after wave of the creatures pouring from every opening. But slowly, the Black Templars gained the upper hand. The squigs, for all their ferocity, were no match for the Emperor's finest warriors. When the last of the creatures finally fell, the Templars took stock of their situation. They had survived, but not without cost. Several brothers had been wounded, though none fatally, and the encounter raised troubling questions. If there were squigs here, there might be orcs as well, lurking somewhere in the depths of the massive wreck. The company pressed deeper into the hulk, seeking a more defensible position to wait out the storm. In the darkness, they encountered other horrors, Gretchen and feral orcs that had made the wreck their home for 5 decades. Each encounter was met with the same implacable fury, the Black Templars purging the alien infestation with methodical precision. When at last the radstorm passed and the company emerged from the hulk, Brother Ansgar stood apart from his brothers, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The visions were stronger now, he reported. They were close. Their destiny awaited them to the northeast, and it was something of terrible importance. While Fighting Company Adlar pursued their vision quest through the ash wastes, another drama was unfolding across the desolate landscape. The warlord titan Tyrannus Maximus, one of the ancient god machines of Legio Magna, stalked the desert in search of the enemy. Its princeps, Magnus Eckhart, had commanded the great war engine for over 200 years. He was old beyond the measure of ordinary men, his body kept alive by the technologies of the Adeptus Mechanicus, his mind bound to the Titan through the mind-impulse link that allowed him to move and fight as one with the machine. To be a princeps was to know a communion that no ordinary human could imagine. The Titan was not merely a vehicle, it was a partner, a companion, almost a lover. Eckhart felt the reactor that was its heart, the great legs that were its limbs. the devastating weapons that were its means of expression. When the Titan was wounded, he felt pain. When it strode into battle, he felt exhilaration beyond words. Tyrannus Maximus had been part of a pair, accompanied by its sister Titan Dominus Exitio. Together, they had hunted Orc forces in the wastes, destroying a massive battle fortress and its accompanying air support. But Dominus Exitio had fallen in that engagement, its princeps sacrificing himself to buy time for Tyrannus Maximus to recover from a grievous wound. Now Eckhart walked alone, his Titan damaged, its plasma reactor leaking energy, its systems operating at reduced efficiency. They needed to return to Hellsbreach for repairs. But Hellsbreach, as we know, was no more. When Tyrannus Maximus arrived at the coordinates of the Titan base, Eckhart found only the same devastation that Fighting Company Adlar had discovered. The atomic signature was unmistakable. The Orcs had somehow obtained and deployed nuclear weapons against the Imperial stronghold. Yet the old princeps was not without resources. His tactical officer, Castlevane, detected something through the interference that plagued their sensors. Readings that suggested a massive enemy installation hidden somewhere in the wastes, and with it, the source of the atomic weapons that had destroyed Hellsbreach. Eckhart made his decision. He would not retreat to seek repairs at some distant base. He would find this Orc installation and destroy it, or die in the attempt. For a princeps who had served for 2 centuries, who had walked as a god across 100 battlefields, there could be no finer end. Tyrannus Maximus turned northeast and began its hunt. The Black Templars continued their march, drawn ever onward by the visions of their Emperor's champion. They crested a rise and looked down upon a sight that confirmed everything Ansgar had seen. Before them stretched a rift valley, its walls towering cliffs of striated rock, and rising from the valley floor was a volcanic crater, ancient and dormant, its caldera transformed into something far more terrible than any natural formation. It was an Orc factory. The greenskins had turned the crater into a massive industrial complex, filled with forges and workshops and the grinding machinery of war. Smoke and flame belched from countless chimneys. The sounds of hammering and the guttural shouts of Orc workers echoed across the wasteland, and rising from the heart of this blasphemous factory was something that made even the hardened space marines pause in their advance. A mega-gargant. Gargants were the Orc equivalent of Titans, massive walking war machines constructed with the crude but effective technology of the greenskins. They were towering idols to the savage gods of the Orcs, Gork and Mork, weapons of terrifying destructive power. But a mega-gargant was something far worse. It was a gargant of unprecedented size, a walking city of guns and armor, capable of devastating entire armies. This mega-gargant was still under construction, but it was nearly complete. Its massive legs were already functional, and its hull bristled with weapons. When finished, it would march on Tartarus Hive, and nothing the defenders could field would be able to stop it. Now the Black Templars understood. This was why the Emperor had sent them visions. This was the threat they had been guided to confront. If the mega-gargant was allowed to become operational, it would lead the Orc assault on Tartarus, and the Hive would fall. Perhaps all of Armageddon Secundus would fall with it. As Castellan Adlar studied the enemy installation, considering how his 60 space marines might assault such a fortress, they witnessed another arrival. The ground shook with footsteps like earthquakes. Through the dust and smoke, a vast silhouette emerged. Tyrannus Maximus had arrived. The meeting of the Black Templars and the God Machine was a moment of profound significance. Princeps Eckhart had picked up fragmentary signals from the Space Marines' comnet and had adjusted his course to make contact. When the two forces came together, it was as if the Emperor himself had ordained their union. Through Vox communication, the principals of both forces shared what they knew. Eckhart revealed the destruction of Hellsbreach and his tracking of the enemy installation. Adlar explained the visions that had guided his company to this place. Both agreed that the mega-gargant must be destroyed before it could be completed. But how? The factory was defended by thousands of Orcs. The mega-gargant itself, though incomplete, already possessed significant weaponry. And even together, the Black Templars and Tyrannus Maximus were but a small force against such numbers. It was Brother Ansgar who provided the answer. The visions, he explained, had shown him not just the factory, but the method of its destruction. The Titan must engage the mega-gargant directly. In the chaos of that titanic battle, the Black Templars would infiltrate the factory and sabotage the Gargant's critical systems from within. It was a desperate plan, one that risked everything. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and the fate of Tartarus Hive hung in the balance. As the sun set over Armageddon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, the attack began. Tyrannus Maximus strode toward the crater factory like an avenging god. The ground trembled with each step of its massive feet, its weapons systems powered up, targeting cogitators calculating firing solutions for the defenses that bristled from the crater rim. The orcs saw them coming and responded with typical greenskin enthusiasm. Gun emplacements opened fire, shells and rockets streaking toward the approaching Titan. Mobs of orc warriors poured out of the factory, eager to bring down the great machine through sheer weight of numbers. Tyrannus Maximus answered with fire and fury. Its Gatling blaster screamed to life, spewing a torrent of shells that scythed through the orc mobs like a farmer's scythe through wheat. Its volcano cannon, that weapon capable of cracking open starships, spoke in a beam of light that melted through fortifications like wax before a flame. Orcs died in their hundreds, in their thousands, but still they came. Meanwhile, Fighting Company Adlar advanced through a secondary approach, a tunnel network that Tekmarini Sendor had detected with his scanning equipment. The Black Templars moved in tactical squads, their bolters ready, their chainswords hungry for alien blood. They emerged inside the crater itself, into a hellish industrial landscape of fire and smoke and grinding machinery. Everywhere, orc workers and warriors moved about their tasks, some manufacturing weapons and ammunition, others rushing to defend against the Titan's assault. The Black Templars fell upon them without mercy. Squad by squad, the Templars carved a path through the factory complex. Brother Ansgar led the assault, the black sword blazing with power as he cut down every orc that dared to stand before him. His artificer armor turned aside blows that would have felled a lesser warrior. His bolt pistol spoke again and again, each shot finding its mark. Chaplain Wolfram fought beside the champion, his crozius crackling with each devastating blow. The litanies that poured from his lips were prayers of hatred and righteous fury, each word a condemnation of the alien enemy. Castellan Adlar directed the assault with veteran precision, sending squads to neutralize key targets while keeping the bulk of his force moving toward the mega-gargant itself. They needed to reach the great machine and destroy it from within before it could be fully activated. But the orcs were not without leadership. The war boss who commanded this factory, a massive brute covered in cybernetic enhancements and crude bionics, rallied his warriors and led a counterattack against the Space Marines. The two forces met in a clash of ceramite and green flesh, of bolt and blade and crude orc weapons. Black Templars fell, their lives given in service to the Emperor. But for every Templar who died, a dozen orcs were cut down. Brother Kals, a veteran whose voice had been replaced with an augmetic after wounds suffered long ago, died holding a choke point against a mob of charging orcs. Brother Lernian fell to a lucky shot from an orc rocket. Brother Daman was pulled down by Gretchen swarming over him like insects, and he died taking a dozen of the small greenskins with him. Each death was remembered, each name inscribed upon the rolls of honor that the Black Templars would compile when the battle was done. But there was no time for mourning in the heat of combat. The living fought on, inspired by the sacrifice of their fallen brothers. Outside the factory, the battle between Titans raged. The mega-gargant, though incomplete, had been activated. Its crew of mech boys and Gretchen had gotten its legs working and its guns firing. Now it strode out to meet Tyrannus Maximus, a duel of gods. The two massive war machines circled each other like boxers in a ring, each seeking an advantage. The mega-gargant was larger, its weapons more numerous. But Tyrannus Maximus had something its opponent lacked: the experience of its princeps, a man who had fought in such battles for 200 years. Eckhart felt every blow that struck his titan like wounds to his own body. Shells cratered the armor of Tyrannus Maximus. A lucky shot from one of the Gargant's weapons tore away a sensor array. But still the old princeps fought on, maneuvering his war machine with the skill of a master. The volcano cannon fired, and a beam of focused energy cut into the mega-gargant's chest armor. Molten metal sprayed in all directions. The orc machine staggered but did not fall. The Gargant returned fire with everything it had. Streams of bullets and shells hammered against Tyrannus Maximus's void shields. Rockets spiraled through the air, some deflected by the energy barriers, others striking home against the Titan's sacred hull. Inside the god machine, alarms blared and warning lights flashed. Chief Engineer Dvorad reported damage to multiple systems. The plasma reactor was straining to maintain output. Void shield generators were failing. But Eckhart would not retreat. He drove his Titan forward, closing the distance with the Gargant, his weapons firing continuously. This was his final battle, he knew. He would take this abomination with him into death. Inside the factory, the Black Templars had reached the base of the mega-gargant. The great machine towered above them, its legs like buildings, its hull blocking out the smoke-stained sky. Somewhere within that mass of metal and orcish engineering was the reactor that powered the beast. Tech Marine Issendur led the demolition team. With melter bombs and shaped charges, they would cripple the Gargant from within, detonating its power systems and turning the war machine into a funeral pyre. But the orcs were not about to let them succeed. The war boss himself led a countercharge, his power claw crackling with energy, his shooter spitting death at the Space Marines. Brother Ansgar stepped forward to meet him. The duel that followed was the stuff of legends. The Emperor's champion, bearing the sacred armor of faith and wielding the blessed black sword, faced the monstrous orc warboss in single combat. The warboss was huge, even for an orc, standing nearly as tall as a Terminator in his crude mega armor. His power claw could have sheared through tank armor with ease. But Ansgar was the Emperor's chosen. He moved with supernatural grace, guided by visions that showed him where each blow would fall an instant before it landed. The black sword sang through the air, its energy field leaving trails of blue light in the smoke-filled gloom. The warboss swung his power claw, a blow that would have crushed Ansgar into paste. But the champion sidestepped, the weapon missing him by centimeters, and counterattacked with a thrust that punched through the warboss's armor and into the alien's chest. The orc roared in pain and rage, lashing out with a backhand that caught Ansgar across the chest and sent him flying. But the champion rolled as he landed, coming up in a fighting stance, the black sword still in his hand. They clashed again and again, each exchange a deadly dance. The warboss's strength was immense, his armor thick, his weapons devastating. But Ansgar was faster, more skilled, and he had something the orc could never possess: the blessing of the Emperor. The final blow came almost too quickly to see. Ansgar ducked under a swing of the power claw and brought the black sword up in an arc that severed the warboss's arm at the elbow. Before the orc could react, the champion reversed his grip and drove the blade through the alien's neck. The warboss fell, and with him fell the morale of the orc defenders. With their leader dead, the orcs' cohesion shattered. The Black Templars pressed their advantage, fighting their way into the Gargant's interior, while their brothers held off the disorganized remnants of the Greenskin force. Tech Marine Issendur worked with practiced efficiency, placing charges at critical points throughout the Gargant's internal structure. The reactor core was his primary target, a crude but powerful atomic pile that provided the machine with the energy it needed to function. Outside, Tyrannus Maximus was dying. The Titan had sustained catastrophic damage, its void shields collapsed, its armor breached in a dozen places. Princeps Eckhart could feel the machine's pain as if it were his own, but he had accomplished his mission. The mega-gargant was crippled, held in place while the Black Templars did their work. There was only one thing left to do. Eckhart gave the order to overload the plasma reactor. Tyrannus Maximus would go critical, unleashing the full power of its atomic heart in a final, devastating explosion. The blast would destroy the Titan, the mega-gargant, and the factory complex in a single cataclysmic moment. The Black Templars received the warning and began their retreat. Fighting their way through the remaining orcs, they fell back toward the exit, racing against the countdown that would end everything. Not all of them made it. Brothers fell to orc fire as they ran. Others stayed behind to hold choke points, sacrificing themselves so their battle brothers could escape. But most of the company made it out of the crater, reaching the relative safety of the surrounding wastes. Behind them, the countdown reached 0. Tyrannus Maximus's reactor exploded with the force of a small sun. The fireball consumed the Titan, the mega-gargant, and the entire factory complex in an instant of blinding light. A mushroom cloud rose into the sky, visible for hundreds of kilometers. The ground shook with the force of an earthquake. When the light faded and the dust began to settle, the crater that had been a Gargant factory was a molten lake of slag. The mega-gargant was gone, vaporized along with thousands of orcs. The threat to Tartarus Hive had been eliminated. The sun set over Armageddon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The surviving members of Fighting Company Adlar gathered in the shadow of the Rift Valley walls, surrounded by the desolation they had helped to create. 40 Space Marines remained of the 60 who had begun this mission. 20 brothers had given their lives to destroy the mega-gargant and save Tartarus Hive from destruction. Their names would be inscribed in the rolls of the chapter, their deeds remembered for as long as the Black Templars endured. Among the wreckage scattered across the wasteland, they found something remarkable. The command deck of Tyrannus Maximus, blown clear of the explosion by some miracle of physics, or perhaps by the will of the Emperor himself, had crashed to Earth relatively intact. Princeps Eckhart and his bridge crew had not survived, but their remains could be honored properly. Brother Ansgar, still wearing the armor of faith, still bearing the black sword, climbed atop the wreckage to address his brothers. The setting sun cast long shadows across the desert as he spoke. He called upon them to remember those who had fallen. Chaplain Adlar, who had led them with wisdom and courage. Princeps Magnus Eckhart and the crew of Tyrannus Maximus, whose sacrifice had made victory possible. The brothers of Fighting Company Adlar, who had given their lives in service to the Emperor. Each name was spoken aloud, each warrior remembered. Brother Kalan, Initiate Lernian, Brother Pilot Horek, Brother Kales, Brother Darman. The list went on, a litany of sacrifice that would echo through the ages. When the last name had been spoken, Ansgar raised the black sword above his head, its blade catching the dying light of the sun. This victory, he declared, was but the beginning. The Black Templars' crusade was not yet finished. The Orcs still held vast territories on Armageddon. The warlord Grimskar, who had attacked Solemnus and sparked this final crusade, was still at large. There was more work to be done, more battles to be fought, more honor to be reclaimed. The surviving Templars raised their weapons in salute, their voices joining in the battle cry that had echoed across 1,000 battlefields: no pity, no remorse, no fear. And behind them, the fires of the destroyed factory still burned, a beacon visible for kilometers around, a testament to what the servants of the Emperor could accomplish through faith and sacrifice. The war for Armageddon continued. While the destruction of the mega-gargant had saved Tartarus Hive, the planet remained engulfed in conflict. The Orcs held 3 of the 8 Hive cities outright and besieged 2 more. Their warbands roamed the wastes and jungles, a constant threat to Imperial forces. And in the equatorial jungles that divided the northern and southern landmasses, a different kind of war was being waged. The jungles of Armageddon were a world unto themselves. Dense canopies blocked out the sun, creating a realm of perpetual twilight where predators lurked behind every tree. The humidity was oppressive, the diseases numerous and deadly, and everywhere there were orcs. 50 years of orc presence had allowed their spores to take root throughout the jungle. Feral orc tribes had grown from these spores, savage even by orc standards, having developed in isolation from the main warbands. They knew the jungle as the Imperium's forces never could, using its dangers as weapons against the intruders. It was into this green hell that Chaplain Wolfram led a kill team of Black Templars on a mission of sacred duty. Following the battle at the Crater Factory, the survivors of Fighting Company Adlar had been reorganized. Those fit for continued combat were divided into smaller units, each with its own mission. Wolfram's task was perhaps the most solemn of all: to recover the gene seed of fallen Black Templars from the jungle depths. Gene seed is the legacy of every Space Marine chapter. It is the biological material that allows new Space Marines to be created, containing within it the genetic heritage of the Primarchs themselves. When a Space Marine falls in battle, his gene seed must be recovered if at all possible, for without it, the chapter cannot create new warriors to replace those lost. Fighting Company Jarold had entered the jungles weeks earlier and had not been heard from since. 23 Black Templars had vanished into the green depths, their fate unknown. Wolfram's mission was to find them, or what remained of them, and recover their gene seed for the chapter. The kill team numbered 12 warriors in total. Alongside Wolfram were Brother Ansgar, still serving as Emperor's champion, and 10 other veterans chosen for their skill and determination. Among them was the venerable Brother Jarold, entombed within the armored sarcophagus of a dreadnought, his ancient body sustained by the life support systems of his walking coffin. They carried with them weapons blessed by the chaplains of the chapter, and faith that burned brighter than any jungle sun. The journey into the jungle was a descent into a different world. The ash wastes they had known were harsh and desolate, but they were at least comprehensible. The jungle was something else entirely. Every plant seemed to have thorns or poison. Every shadow concealed potential threats. The sounds of the forest were a constant cacophony of animal calls and insect chirps, punctuated by the occasional distant crash of something large moving through the undergrowth. Brother Huawa served as the team's scout, his enhanced senses picking out trails that would have been invisible to ordinary eyes. He led them along paths used by the feral orcs, following the signs of their passage deeper into the jungle. They encountered their first orcs on the second day. A hunting party of feral greenskins, little more than savages with crude weapons, crossed their path. The Black Templars fell upon them without mercy, bolters coughing death into the twilight gloom. The fight was over in seconds, the orcs cut down before they could even mount a defense. But the victory came at a cost. The sound of gunfire had alerted other orcs in the area. For the rest of the day, the kill team found themselves pursued by scattered bands of greenskins, each encounter slowing their progress. They pressed on nonetheless. The gene seed of their brothers could not be left to rot in this alien wilderness. On the fourth day, they found what they were looking for. The clearing showed signs of desperate battle. Bolter craters pocked the ground and trees. Dried blood, both red and green, stained the soil, and scattered among the debris were the bodies of Black Templars, their armor rent and broken, their weapons lying beside them. 14 bodies lay in the clearing. 14 of the 23 brothers who had entered the jungle with Fighting Company Gerhard had died here, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But where were the other 9? Apothecary Blyant moved among the fallen, his narthecium extracting the precious gene seed from each body. It was solemn work, performed with reverence and care. Each progenoid gland recovered was a piece of the chapter's future preserved. A small victory wrested from the jaws of defeat. But Brother Ansgar was troubled. The visions that had guided him since the crater battle were growing stronger again, showing him things that disturbed his soul. He saw darkness and blood, ancient stones and forbidden symbols. He saw enemies that were not orcs, things that had no place in the materium, horrors from the depths of the warp itself. He spoke to Chaplain Wolfram of what he saw, and the chaplain's expression grew grim. The first war for Armageddon, Wolfram explained, had not been fought against orcs. 500 years before Ghazkul's first invasion, Armageddon had faced a far more terrible threat. The Daemon Primarch Angron, fallen lord of the World Eaters Legion, had descended upon the planet with an army of chaos worshippers and demonic entities. The devastation had been catastrophic, the fighting apocalyptic. In the end, Angron had been defeated and banished back to the warp. But the scars of that war remained. Monuments and shrines to the blood god had been erected throughout the jungles, stones of power that still held echoes of warp energy. The Inquisition had suppressed knowledge of this war, deemed it too dangerous for common knowledge, but the chaplains of the Black Templars were privy to certain secrets. If Ansgar's visions were true, something was stirring those ancient powers, something was calling to the warp from the heart of the jungle. The kill team pressed deeper into the jungle, following Ansgar's visions toward whatever fate awaited them. The signs of corruption grew more evident the further they traveled. Trees grew twisted and wrong, their bark seeming to pulse with unnatural life. The animal sounds fell silent, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed upon the mind. They were not alone in their hunt. Other forces moved through the jungle, drawn by the same dark power that pulled at Ansgar's consciousness. A force of relictors, a chapter of space marines with a controversial reputation, had entered the jungle from another direction. Led by Captain Oberon Uris, they sought something in these cursed depths, something they called sacred knowledge, but which others might call something far darker. The relictors were known for their unsettling practices. They studied the artifacts of chaos, claiming that such knowledge was necessary to defeat the enemy. They recovered daemon weapons from battlefields and kept them in vaults for analysis. Many in the Inquisition viewed them with suspicion, whispered that they had strayed too close to the very evil they claimed to fight. The two space marine forces met in the ruins of an ancient temple, a place where the jungle had been held at bay by the lingering power of whatever had once been worshipped there. The tension between them was immediate and palpable. Wolfram had heard the rumors about the relictors. He did not trust Uris or his intentions in this place, but they were both servants of the Emperor, both fighting against the enemies of mankind. For now, they would work together. Information was shared. Uris revealed that his force had been tracking a warp signature deep in the jungle, a concentration of chaos energy unlike anything they had encountered before. He believed something was about to happen, some ritual or awakening that could threaten the entire planet. Ansgar's visions confirmed this. He saw a circle of standing stones, ancient monuments erected by the followers of Khorne during the First War for Armageddon. He saw a storm gathering, a hole being torn in the fabric of reality, something terrible waiting on the other side. and he saw orcs, thousands of them, converging on the site from all directions, drawn by some instinct or compulsion they could not understand. The two forces agreed to proceed together. Whatever was happening at the stone circle needed to be stopped. But as they prepared to move out, Wolfram could not shake the feeling that Uris had his own agenda, one that might not align with the chaplain's understanding of duty. They found the orcs first. An enormous force of feral greenskins had gathered in a wide valley, their camps spread across the jungle floor like a green carpet. The Black Templars and Relictors observed from the ridgeline above, calculating the enemy numbers. The feral orcs seemed agitated, moving without their usual chaos, as if drawn by some invisible force toward a common destination. At the center of their mass was the largest orc the Space Marines had ever seen, a beast of impossible size that seemed more like a siege engine than a living creature. This was the war boss of the feral tribes, a creature that had grown to monstrous proportions in its 50 years of jungle survival. Upon its back was a howdah, a crude platform from which orc warriors could fire their weapons. It moved through the jungle like a living tank, crushing trees beneath its massive feet. But there was something even more disturbing about this beast. As they observed through magnifying scopes, the Space Marines could see that parts of its body had been augmented with crude bionics. And some of those bionics were fashioned from black and white ceramite, the distinctive coloring of Black Templars' power armor. The feral orcs had found the bodies of Fighting Company Gerhard. They had not merely killed them, they had desecrated their remains, using their sacred armor to enhance their own war boss. The rage that swept through the Templars was profound and terrible. Wolfram had to use all his authority to prevent an immediate charge against the vastly superior enemy force. They needed to be smart about this. They needed to reach the stone circle before the orcs did. But they also needed vengeance. The storm was building as they approached the stone circle. Black clouds swirled overhead, lit from within by lightning that crackled in unnatural colors. The air was thick with ozone and something else, something that made the Space Marines' skin crawl even through their sealed armor. The circle itself was exactly as Ansgar had seen in his visions. Massive standing stones carved with blasphemous runes that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed directly. At the center was an altar stone, stained dark with the blood of uncounted sacrifices made 5 centuries before. And emerging from the darkness between worlds, called by some power none of them understood, came the true enemy. They wore armor of red and brass, adorned with the symbols of Khorne, the blood god. Their weapons were stained with 10,000 years of slaughter. Their eyes burned with the hatred of souls long given over to damnation. World Eaters, traitor Space Marines of the Legion that had turned against the Emperor during the Horus Heresy. The champions of Khorne, who had fought in the First War for Armageddon under their Daemon Primarch, and now returned through the weakening barrier between worlds. The leader of these Chaos Warriors was a monster called Hrothgar Führer, the Ravager of Worlds. He had served Angron in that ancient war and had been trapped in the warp ever since, waiting for the moment when the stones would be activated and the path would open once more. That moment had come. The battle at the stone circle was a 3-way slaughter. The feral orcs arrived in their thousands, drawn by the warp storm like moths to flame. They found not one enemy but 2, and in typical orc fashion, they attacked both with equal enthusiasm. Green Tide crashed against ceramite walls as Space Marines of both chapters fought back-to-back against the overwhelming greenskin numbers. But the World Eaters were the greater threat. These were not savage aliens, but warriors who had once been humanity's defenders, now twisted into something far worse. They fought with the skill of 10,000 years of experience, their rage channeled through weapons that had tasted the blood of countless foes. Brother Ansgar faced the Ravager himself, black sword meeting chain axe in a clash that sent sparks showering across the blood-soaked ground. Führer was ancient and powerful, blessed by his dark god with unnatural strength and resilience. Each blow of his axe could have felled a lesser warrior, but Ansgar was the Emperor's champion. He fought with the certainty of one who knows he is exactly where he is meant to be, doing exactly what he was born to do. The black sword sang through the air, its power field crackling with holy energy. Again and again, he turned aside the Chaos Champion's attacks, his own counterstrikes chipping away at the ancient armor of his enemy. Around them, the battle raged. Chaplain Wolfram stood at the head of his brothers, his Crozius Arcanum dealing death to any who came within reach. Brother Jarold, the venerable Dreadnought, carved a path through the orcs, his weapons roaring their defiance, but the relictors fought strangely. Captain Euris and his warriors seemed more interested in reaching the altar stone than in destroying the enemy. Wolfram saw Euris fighting toward the center of the circle, cutting down orcs and chaos marines alike with single-minded determination. And then the chaplain saw why. On the altar stone lay a sword, not a crude orc weapon or even a chain blade of chaos, but something far more terrible. It was a daemon weapon, a blade that held within it the essence of a warp entity, a tool of darkness that promised power beyond measure to any who dared to wield it. Euris reached the altar and took up the sword. The effect was immediate and terrible. Power crackled along the blade, and Euris's eyes lit with an unholy light. He raised the weapon high, and every warrior in the circle felt the pulse of dark energy that emanated from it. Wolfram understood then what the relictors had truly come to find. Not to destroy the chaos artifacts, but to claim them. Euris believed he could use the power of the warp against its own servants, could turn the weapons of the enemy to the Emperor's cause. But Wolfram knew better. He had studied the law of chaos, had seen what happened to those who thought they could control the uncontrollable. The daemon sword would not serve Euris. It would consume him, corrupt him, turn him into another servant of the very evil he claimed to fight. He could not allow that to happen. The confrontation between Wolfram and Euris was brief and bitter. The chaplain demanded that Euris drop the daemon sword. Such weapons were anathema, he declared, tools of heresy that could not be sanctified by any intention, no matter how pure. To take up such a blade was to begin the long slide into damnation. Euris refused. He argued that the relictors' methods were necessary, that the Imperium was losing its war against chaos through dogmatic adherence to rules that only weakened humanity's defenses. With weapons like the daemon sword, they could turn the enemy's power against them. The argument might have gone on, but the battle would not wait. World Eaters and orcs pressed in from all sides. There was no time for philosophy. In the end, Wolfram did what he had to do. He raised his Crozius and declared Euris Diabolus, a servant of chaos, cast out from the brotherhood of the Adeptus Astartes. The relictors, by their actions, had proven themselves heretics. The Black Templars turned on their former allies. It was a tragedy, Space Marines fighting Space Marines while the true enemy raged around them. Relictors fell to Templar bolters, Templars fell to relictor blades. The daemon sword drank the blood of both, growing stronger with each kill. But in the end, the Black Templars prevailed. Euris was struck down, the daemon sword torn from his grasp and cast into the roiling warp storm that still churned above the circle. Without its power to sustain them, the remaining World Eaters began to fade, their physical forms losing cohesion as the rift between worlds slowly closed. Hrothgar Fura, the Ravager of Worlds, fell last. Brother Ansgar delivered the killing blow, driving the black sword through the Chaos Champion's chest and into the altar stone behind him. The ancient Cornate warrior screamed his defiance to the last, but even his god could not save him from the Emperor's chosen. As the warp storm dissipated and the unnatural clouds began to break, the surviving Black Templars stood amidst the carnage of the stone circle. The feral orcs, without the warp energy to drive them, had scattered back into the jungle. The World Eaters were gone, banished once more to the hell that had spawned them. The relictors lay dead or dying, their heresy ended. Victory, such as it was, belonged to the Emperor's faithful. The return journey through the jungle was somber and slow. The Black Templars carried their fallen brothers with them, refusing to leave them in that cursed place. The gene seed of all who had fallen was recovered, preserved for the chapter's future. They emerged from the jungle at Sabera Base, a forward operating position established by the Armageddon Orc Hunter regiments. The Imperial forces there were shocked to see Space Marines emerge from the depths that had claimed so many, but their reception was warm. The Black Templars were legends, and to host them was an honor. Chaplain Wolfram sent a report to the Divine Fury, documenting everything that had occurred. The Relictors' heresy, the World Eaters' attempted return, the daemon artifacts that had been found and destroyed. Marshal Brandt needed to know what his warriors had faced and overcome. The response came within hours. The Solemnus Crusade was to continue. There was more work to be done on Armageddon, more orcs to be killed, more honor to be reclaimed. But the chaplain and his survivors were commended for their actions. They had prevented a disaster that could have threatened the entire world. Brother Ansgar spent the night in prayer, kneeling in the small chapel that the base maintained for its soldiers. The visions had not stopped, if anything. They had grown clearer since the stone circle. He saw the future stretching out before him, battle after battle, sacrifice after sacrifice, until the crusade reached its final end. He saw Morkrul Grimskar, the Orc war boss who had attacked Solemnus and begun this entire crusade. The war boss was still alive, still gathering power, still a threat to everything the Black Templars held sacred. The crusade would not be complete until he was destroyed. He saw his own death too, though the details were unclear. It would come on Armageddon, he knew, in service to the Emperor. He did not fear it. To die in battle, doing the Emperor's work, was the greatest honor any Space Marine could hope for. When the dawn came, Brother Ansgar rose from his prayers and donned his armor. The armor of faith had been damaged in the battle at the Stone Circle, but it had been repaired by the tech priests who served the base. The black sword hung at his hip, clean and sharp, ready for the next fight. Chaplain Wolfram gathered the survivors of the kill team for a final briefing. Their mission in the jungle was complete, but the war for Armageddon continued. They would rejoin the main force of the Solemnus Crusade and continue the fight until the orcs were driven from this world or every last Black Templar lay dead upon its soil. There was no debate, no discussion. Each warrior knew what was expected of him. They had sworn oaths of vengeance, and those oaths would be fulfilled. And so the Black Templars returned to war. Across Armageddon, the fighting continued without respite. Hive cities burned and bled under constant siege. The ash wastes echoed with the thunder of Titan-grade weapons. In the jungles, feral orcs hunted Imperial soldiers while Imperial soldiers hunted them back in an endless cycle of violence. The survivors of Fighting Company Adlar and the kill team merged into a single force under Chaplain Wolfram's command. They had lost so many, but those who remained were tempered by fire and faith, warriors hardened by experiences that would have broken lesser men. They fought in the defense of Hive Hellsreach, holding a wall against waves of orc attackers while civilians evacuated to deeper levels. They struck at orc supply lines in the fire wastes, destroying convoys of munitions and fuel. They hunted orc war bosses in the Deadlands, taking skulls as trophies of their victories. And always, Brother Ansgar was at the forefront. The Emperor's champion led every charge, his black sword reaping a terrible harvest of alien dead. The visions guided him to where he was needed most, to battles that would have been lost without his intervention. He became a legend among the Imperial forces, a figure of hope in a war that seemed endless. But he knew, as all the Black Templars knew, that their crusade was not about hope. It was about duty. It was about honor. It was about the vows they had sworn and the vengeance they had promised. Morkrul Grimskar remained their ultimate target. The orc war boss who had attacked Solemnus had grown even more powerful during the war, gathering tribes under his banner, stockpiling weapons and vehicles. Intelligence suggested he was planning something big, a major offensive that would shatter the Imperial defenses and open the way for Ghazkul's final conquest of the planet. The Black Templars would not allow that to happen. The Solemnus Crusade had begun with hundreds of battle brothers. Now less than 100 remained. Each survivor carried the weight of those who had fallen, the memories of brothers who had given their lives for the Emperor and the Chapter. But their spirits were not broken. If anything, their resolve had hardened. They were the Black Templars, the inheritors of Sigismund's legacy, the eternal crusaders who had never stopped fighting since the founding of their chapter. 10,000 years of war had prepared them for this moment. Chaplain Wolfram addressed his warriors before what they all knew might be their final battle. He spoke of duty and sacrifice, of the honor that came from service to the Emperor. He reminded them of their fallen brothers, whose spirits surely watched from the Emperor's side. He called upon them to prove worthy of the legacy they had inherited. And when he was done, Brother Ansgar stepped forward. The Emperor's champion raised the black sword, and his voice rang out across the assembled warriors. This was their last crusade, he declared. Not because they would be defeated, but because they would be victorious. They would destroy Grimskar and avenge Solemnus. They would purge the orc filth from Armageddon, and if they died in the attempt, they would die as Black Templars, with swords in their hands and prayers on their lips. No pity, he called out. No remorse, the warriors answered. No fear, they roared together. And they went to war. The war for Armageddon would last for years yet. The conflict that began with Ghazkul's invasion would grind on, consuming lives by the millions, reshaping the planet and its people forever. In time, historians would call it one of the greatest battles of the 41st millennium, a crucible in which the fate of the Imperium hung in the balance. The Black Templars of the Solemnus Crusade would play their part until the very end. Many would fall, all would be remembered, their names would be inscribed in the great rolls of honor kept aboard their chapter's fleet, eternal testament to their service and sacrifice. Brother Ansgar, the Emperor's champion, would meet his destiny in battle against Morkrul Grimscar himself. The duel would become the stuff of legend, spoken of in hushed tones for generations to come. The outcome of that battle, and the fate of both warriors, is a story for another time. What matters is this: when the darkness pressed in from all sides, when the enemies of mankind seemed countless and unstoppable, the Black Templars answered the call. They did not ask whether victory was possible. They did not calculate the odds or weigh the costs. They simply did what they had always done, what they would always do. They fought for the Emperor, for Dawn, for Sigismund, for the Imperium, and all the countless billions who depended upon its protection. They fought with bolter and chainsword, with faith and fury, with the absolute conviction that their cause was righteous. This is the way of the Black Templars. This has always been their way. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, their crusade goes on, forever. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to the channel if you liked the story.